Having too many things can make your life overwhelming, but I don't think getting rid of everything is necessarily the answer. I've always felt like I exist somewhere in the middle between someone who owns only the essentials and someone who constantly wants more. For me, I think that space is always where I've always been the most comfortable. Because see, I like the idea of minimalism and I like what it represents, and I like the idea of being intentional with the things that you own. But I also know that I will probably never be someone who can fit every possession I own into a single room. And honestly, I don't think I need to be. A couple of months ago, I made a video about exploring minimalism after reading the book Goodbye Things, the New Japanese Minimalism. And that book introduced me to a completely different way of thinking about my possessions and the role they play in my life. But while I agreed with a lot of the ideas behind minimalism, I realized that I connected more with the principles than the practice itself. I didn't want to remove everything from my life, but I just wanted to understand what actually deserved a place in it. In that video, I also mentioned how me and a friend jokingly came up with the term middle-malism, a middle ground between minimalism and I guess consumerism. After looking into it more, I realized there are already concepts that describe parts of this idea, things like essentialism, middle-malism, and conscious consumerism, but I like my word better. And I think the idea behind middle-malism describes exactly where I think a lot of people actually are. You don't want your possessions to control your life, but you also don't want to remove the things that make your life better. And that's what I want to talk about here, because I think the goal isn't to own the least amount possible. The goal is just to make sure that the things that you own are worth the attention that they require. And it's actually a lot simpler than you would think, because it's really all about owning things you genuinely enjoy. One thing I think I misunderstood about minimalism is that the assumed goal is always just getting rid of things. The fewer things you have, the better that you're doing, and I understand where that comes from. There's a lot of freedom that comes from removing unnecessary things from your life. But when I think of minimalism, I don't think of it as some type of punishment that says I'm not allowed to or shouldn't have a certain number of things. As long as the things that I have bring me joy, are useful, or improve my creative energy. I don't ask myself, can I survive without this? Because that's extreme. I can survive without most things. I can survive without my cameras, or I can survive without certain clothes. I could survive without certain hobbies and tools that I have, but that doesn't mean these things don't add value to my life. A better question is, does this thing improve my life in a meaningful way? That question changes everything, because now I can separate things that genuinely support me from things that I bought because I think they might be useful someday. There's a difference between owning a camera because creating videos is something you care about and owning a piece of gear that sits not used because you feel guilty about not using it. The value of something isn't always obvious to someone else. There are things that I own that might mean nothing to another person, but they represent creativity, memories, or experiences that matter to me. And I think that's the best part about minimalism, or intentional ownership in general. You get to decide what matters. But there is another side to this, because just because you enjoy something doesn't mean it automatically deserves unlimited space in your life, because every possession has a hidden cost. When we think about the cost of owning something, we usually only think about the price we pay for it. But that's only the beginning. Everything you own requires something from you. For everything that you have to store it, clean it, charge it, update it, organize it, transport it, repair it if it breaks, and if you don't use it, you feel guilty about it. Sometimes the biggest cost of something isn't money, it's attention. This is something I've noticed a lot because I move around a lot. And every time I move, I'm reminded of what actually matters because I physically have to decide what comes with me. The things that I use regularly and genuinely enjoy are easy decisions. But the things that sit around and take up space and create extra work are much harder to justify keeping. Moving has forced me to ask myself questions I probably wouldn't have asked otherwise. Is this worth transporting again? Is this worth finding space for? Is this something that actually improves my life, or just something that gives me another responsibility? And over time, I've realized that some things make your life better, while other things simply give you another job to do. But this doesn't only apply to physical possessions, because once I started noticing the cost of my possessions, I started noticing it everywhere. The same thing can apply with digital tools, or commitments and routines, or relationships. You can have too many apps that do the same thing. You can have too many obligations that you agreed to before. You can have routines that seem productive but are impossible to maintain. The goal isn't to remove everything and create the simplest life possible. The goal is to create a life that doesn't require constant maintenance. When I think of minimalism, again, I learned that it's not just about owning fewer things or next to nothing. It's really about designing my life so fewer parts of it require this constant supervision. And to me, that means things like fewer digital tools or apps that do the exact same thing, or making fewer commitments out of guilt. Having fewer routines or giving myself fewer projects are just things that are competing for my attention. But that's not always possible, so I had to find a nice middle ground. Now, you'd assume that someone like me who makes videos about intentional living and who talks about reducing complexity has a simple life, but I don't. And honestly, I don't think most people have simple lives. Because I work in healthcare and I move all the time and I'm trying to build a creative life on top of that. And that's exactly where reducing complexities where I actually can matter so much to me. I just want to make sure the things that and systems that I have are worth carrying around with me. And that's why I use specific productivity apps instead of like 20 different ones. And that's why I have certain routines in place to make sure that I stay productive. And I think that's where minimalism really exists. It sits between the two extremes, and that's why I had to find the balance between minimalism and consumerism. On one side, you have extreme minimalism, the idea that fewer things is always better, that wanting things is suspicious, and that everything you should own should serve a clear practical purpose. And on the other side, you have consumerism, more options, more upgrades, more novelty, but also more things competing for your attention. I don't think either extreme is the answer for everyone, and definitely not me, because I like a nice middle ground. I think there's value in learning from minimalism without feeling like you have to follow every rule. But I can also own things that I enjoy without allowing that ownership to control my life. For me, minimalism just comes down to these four ideas: own things you enjoy, avoid possessions that create more maintenance than value, design a life around lower management overhead, and find a balance between intentional ownership and unnecessary consumption. The goal is not to convince everyone that they need fewer things. The goal is to make people more aware of the relationship that they have with the things they own, because the things in your life are always asking something from you. My argument or thesis or whatever is just that everyone should be able to become more aware of the work that's attached to the things that we own. To me, a simpler life doesn't only require removing everything that I love, it really just requires me to become a more selective person about what deserves my time and attention. Minimalism just wasn't the final answer for me, and not because I owned too much and couldn't let go, but because it turned everything I own into a rule book that was a little too rigid for my life, the life that I actually live. That's why minimalism, somewhere in the center, is what actually works for me. Does minimalism resonate for you? If so, what's like the first thing that comes to mind? Maybe like too many possessions or too many routines and commitments? Let me know, because I'm interested if you like the way that sounds too. Thank you for watching. Like always, I'll see you in the next one.